And thank you so much for joining us for this broadcast, Your Voice, Your Future. You know, on the occasion of Dr. Martin Luther King's 97th birthday, I reflect back on his letter from the Birmingham jail, where he called for a morally grounded, nonviolent disruption of injustice. He criticized moderate complacency and argued that people have a moral duty to engage in nonviolent, direct action when legal channels stall and laws are unjust. He insisted that freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor, and he framed civil disobedience as loving, open, and law-respecting because it exposes injustice and accepts penalties to awaken communities. It is a call for an ethical form of protest, which balances action that is disruptive, but with firm nonviolence, so we may have a genuine dialogue instead of a monologue. No echo chambers, no shouting down opponents. These are Dr. King's words. These lessons are applicable today. Why? We see protests and counter-protests turn to riots, people beaten and killed. We see people being shouted down by those who disagree with them rather than those engaging in meaningful dialogue. Just this past weekend, we saw a massive disruption of a church led by one of our former colleagues, Don Lemon, where children were in attendance and seen leaving traumatized. They were not given a chance to sit solemnly and respect the word of the Lord, but were disrupted and shouted down with no meaningful dialogue present from the disruptors. There is one recurring theme throughout all of Dr. King Jr.'s short 39 years of life, which is that every time he saw an injustice, he did not shout, he did not attack, but he spoke and engaged with others. His mind, his heart, and soul were open so that he could open the minds, hearts, and souls of those who ardently disagree with him. We celebrate Dr. King today because he knew that change could be effectuated not by violence or shouting, but with peace and dialogue. He was a man of faith, integrity, imperfect, yes, as we all are, but he had divine purpose. And that legacy from which Dr. King left us should not simply be relegated to a single day of celebration, to Facebook and Instagram and TikTok, posts with his most famous quotes and speeches, but it should be channeled into real action, real dialogue every day. Change is what happens when you listen or when you fight. But change lasts when everybody can agree that the dignity of every person, no matter their political views, is non-negotiable. That truth mattered then, that truth matters now, and that truth will matter forever. And that justice cannot be built on humiliation, intimidation, or fear. Our guest tonight, my good friend and civil rights icon, Ben Crump, is joining us, as well as the former president of the Heritage Foundation, also my dear friend, the Honorable K. Cole James. Let me welcome them both to the airways, and Mr. Crump will be joining us later in the broadcast. When you think about Dr. King's, Ms. James, nonviolence, peaceful, non-negotiable, not shouting down, And you think of where we are today, and you look at Minneapolis and other places across the country, what comes to mind?
Well, first of all, Armstrong, thank you for having me on tonight. And I appreciate being here, especially on a day like today. And quite honestly, after what you just said, we can all wrap it up and go home. There's nothing there that I would take issue with or disagree with. When we see where we are in our country today, Dr. King's words ring even more true than ever. The divide is so great in our country. And there is a need for people who are willing to build bridges across those divides. There's a need in our country for people, and I don't care if you're a liberal or conservative, a Republican or a Democrat, can we all agree? Can we all agree that we want justice, that we want freedom, that we want equality, that we want to see America live up to her best ideals? This ought to be easy. This ought to be something that brings us together. This is one day of the year where we should all be together. Who doesn't appreciate justice, liberty, and freedom? And there needs to be more people in our country who are willing to get out there, roll up their sleeves, and not blow up the bridges that bring us together, but build those bridges. And in my life and in my career, I can tell you that far more has been accomplished when I've been willing to listen to people who disagree with me, understand their perspective and their point of view, find points of agreement and consensus, and then move forward. And I think today offers us a reset button for our country and our ability to do that and live out Dr. King's principles every single day.
You know, Ben Crump, my good friend, you've shaped so many of the national issues today in our country. And I'm sure you sit on the cutting edge of the changes that we see now. It's a different kind of America now. The issues are different, but it seems as though if you look at what's happening today, not much has changed. What is needed now? What is the moral clarity at this moment, Mr. Crump?
Well, I'm so honored to be with you and Kay on such a special day in America to reflect on our history and to learn lessons that we have already lived through. Martin Luther King said in his letter from the Birmingham jail that, we have to strive to be good people. He said, you can't call yourself a good person when you see injustice and you do nothing. He said, you can't say you're a moral person when you see evil and you turn your head and look the other way. He said, no, all our fellow brothers and sisters must be looked at as children of God, that the humanity exists in all human beings. And so we have to strive to be better, a better community. The beloved community is how he phrased it.
Well, what do you think?
I agree with
Mr.
you
Crump,
and Kay that this is an opportunity. In every crisis, it's an opportunity. And we have to listen to one another and not just yell at one another.
So where is the line, Mr. Crump, between necessary moral storytelling and the risk of oversimplifying complex facts?
Well, I believe, honestly, if we look at our sisters and brothers as we look at ourselves, it's the biblical, guidance. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And so, America, we have such great direction with our Constitution. We have to always uphold that Constitution in every situation. It is a bright line for us to follow. And when we shy away from that Constitution, then it turns to something that we don't want to see ourselves as. I mean, the reason why we are called the beacon of hope and justice for all the rest of the world to model is because we live up to our constitutional promise of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
You know, Ms. James, when citizens lose faith that the law applies equally, when they lose faith in that, what is conservatism's obligation to defend institutions or reform them?
We have a tremendous obligation. And I agree with Ben. We have guidelines, and our founders were so great by giving us the Constitution, by giving us not only the Declaration of Independence, but the Bill of Rights as well. And I think we have a responsibility as citizens in this country to live up to that promise. America is an ideal. We are built on principles and values. We are not a perfect union, but we want to be a more perfect union. And, you know, not only did Dr. King say it, but Ronald Reagan said it in his own words, and that is that, you know, freedom is not something that's passed through in the bloodstream. It has to be fought for by every generation. And when I talk to young people today, sometimes they say, I can't believe we're having some of the same debates, some of the same struggles that my grandparents had and my parents had. But unfortunately, due to the nature of man, it is a continuous struggle. And I try to tell my grandchildren that they have an obligation and a responsibility to call America into task to make sure that America lives up to that promise, lives up to that ideal. And so our work isn't done. We've made great strides, we've made great progress, but I would be the first among you to say there's a whole lot more to be done to our institutions, work to be done in our communities. And so this is a good day to remind people of that, and that, you know, freedom isn't free and it isn't static. And it's something that every generation will have to work for.
You know, and freedom is definitely not free. It takes just as much to maintain it as it did to establish it. And freedom is not for the faint of heart. And we must remind ourselves is that freedom does not come from man. It comes from God. And that freedom must be forever vigilant to be maintained. We're going to come back with our very special guest, Ben Crump, K. Cole James. Your voice, your future. We're so honored to have Mr. Crump and Ms. Cole James joining us tonight in such an important discussion. There's so many places they could be tonight, given their reputations, but they chose to join us for our live Your Voice, Your Future, and we do not take that for granted. Mr. Crump, which reform, policing, prosecution, or sentencing, would most meaningfully reduce injustice if changed first, and why?
Well, I think it's certainly, you look at the levels. Prosecutorial reform helps to guide police, but judicial reform helps to guide the system. And so we need our Supreme Court to always follow the Constitution, no matter the situation. There are some cases of first impressions going on with the advent of technology, but many of the issues that lie at our feet, Armstrong Williams, we have precedents that have been well reasoned and established. And so we want to make sure that we send a message, a clarion call, that we stand for the Constitution. We uphold the Constitution. It is what makes America what it is and has always been. I heard Ms. Cole, K. Cole, talk about Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan always talked about America is great because of the Constitution. And so we need to make sure today in 2026, now more than ever, that we have respect for our Constitution because it is arguably one of the greatest documents written in the course of human history.
Ms. James, how does one articulate personal responsibility in communities where opportunity and stability are demonstrably, whether real or unreal, unequal?
That's a great question. And if you would allow me, I really want to go back and speak to the question that you asked. Where can we make the most gain? And then I'll come back to that piece. Armstrong, I don't want to miss the opportunity to say that while we are fighting these battles in courts, while we are leaning on our Constitution to protect us, that one of the biggest areas where we can make the greatest progress is as we bring moral clarity to the United States. And not speaking on anyone's behalf other than my own, I think what this country needs more than anything is revival. And I think that we need heart changes so that we can change our culture, so that we have enough people in our culture that are willing to change the laws, that are willing to enforce the laws as they are. This country needs a heart cleanse. This country needs revival. I think that your question about individual responsibility is a great one. When we look at people and say, you have a personal responsibility to pull yourself up by your bootstraps, I think that message resonates and I agree with it to a degree. But when you start the race and you are standing on or you're not on equal footing or equal grounds, and when you've had 400 years of oppression, when you've had people who worked every day to make sure that you didn't get ahead, when your housing was redlined and you couldn't move, when your education was separate and unequal, when you didn't have access to quality health care, you can't expect, and I could go on with the list of things that we have overcome in this country. And I think that's cause for celebration, by the way. When I stood, as I did this morning, under the Dream Oak at Holly Knoll, where Martin Luther King sat before he came to give his famous I Have a Dream speech in August of 1963. And I thought about where our country was then. When I think about the strides that we made, there is much to be celebrated, much to be celebrated. But I celebrate with very clear eyes. I celebrate understanding what we as Black people in America have had to overcome. And I am able to celebrate because of the resilience that we have as a people. And yes, as I say to our young students all the time, we are expected, I came up in the generation that was told you've got to be twice as good to get half as much. That message is still relevant today. And I tell our young people that it's a tough road ahead. I'm not going to paint a rosy picture. But there is time to stop for a moment and celebrate the wonderful strides that we've made as Americans. I love this country. I love the fact that we can celebrate where we are and what we've accomplished. But I'm very clear-eyed about it as well. I know how much more there is to be done.
Mr. Crump, how do we balance confronting state abuse with confronting violence and disorder within communities without appearing to excuse either?
Well, I think it's just that, Armstrong. It's about transparency, first and foremost. And with technology now, we get to see pretty much all actions or inactions. And so we can look at videotape, body camera, surveillance videos, and you can have ocular proof of what has transpired. And so you can look and say, well, was that action right? And if it was, you applaud that. If that action was wrong, then you go to the second prong, and that is accountability. And so once you have transparency plus accountability, that equals trust. And so whoever's committing the violence on either side, as you said at the beginning of the program, Armstrong, violence is never the solution. No, and so whoever is using excessive force and unnecessary violence should be held accountable. Because if history has taught us anything, it is that violence begets violence, and that it's about us trying to dialogue with one another, listen to one another, learn from one another, and most importantly, Armstrong, most importantly, Kay, that is to respect one another.
Ms. James, can a free society endure without shared moral norms? And if so, where do those norms now come from? Because, Minnesota is less about race, it's less about immigration, it's more about, we've always had a history of people coming to this country, migrants, but they come here to speak the language, respect our rule of law, to adjust, to contribute, and also not lose their culture, but adapt to us as well. And sometimes I think the narrative get lost where we try to make it all about race and immigration.
Well said. It's not all about race, and it isn't necessarily all about immigration. One of the great things about America, we've always viewed ourselves as this great melting pot. And we are a pluralistic society. And what that means by definition is that we are people that come from different backgrounds, different ethnicities. And one of the things that is unique about our country is all it takes for you to be an American is that you raise your hand and you swear an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States, and you can become a full-fledged American citizen by taking that oath. Now, that makes it so much more complicated because we have to take the time to know and understand and appreciate different cultures. But I love that. I would hate a garden where all the flowers were yellow. I would hate a garden where all of the flowers looked exactly the same. But I can tell you that it makes it more difficult, it's more challenging. But that's the greatness of who we are. So, what we have to do is learn to teach our children to respect our differences, to be inclusive with different cultures and different backgrounds and embrace them. But we all come together around the ideal of America. We all come together around the Constitution. And so for new immigrants, sometimes it's a difficult challenge to figure out how to embrace your new country, celebrate your ethnicity and your background, but your allegiance and your loyalty is to your new country. But we do that so well. And we celebrate different cultures and embrace them. And that's the beauty of who we are and what this country is. But it's a lot of hard work and it's not easy.
Mr. Crump, in your view, where does equity clarify justice, and where can it unintentionally undermine equal treatment under the law?
If I understand your question, you're asking about equality and equity.
Yes.
Well, we know, and I think Ms. Cole James articulated it amazingly about the struggles that certain Americans have endured because of our history that we should not try to sweep under the rug or try to ignore. We strive to be a more perfect union, as she said. And so when you talk about equality, that's saying everybody gets the same thing. But when you talk about equity, you acknowledge that everybody's not starting from the same place. And, you know, people want to try to ignore that so much, Armstrong, and it's troubling because what they're saying is that we don't really want people to be at the same place if, you know, for 400 years, you've been, you know, treated as a second-class citizen. You've never gotten 40 acres of a mule. You haven't had access to quality education. You haven't had access to even the most basics of the constitutional rights, like the right to vote. So there's, you know, an acknowledgement that we have to strive to be a more perfect union. Now, I think there are always incredible examples. You've been one of the best I could offer as a prima facie case, Armstrong. As we talk in private, you never make excuses. You always try to see the best in every situation, and you try as best you can to say, I'm a conservative in the true sense as a Ronald Reagan conservative. You know, we disagree on many things, but I can respect you for at least acknowledging that you see that we have work to do and that we don't try to ignore our history. So I don't know if that answers your question, Armstrong, but I tried to put it in context.
Well, I thank you both for doing an outstanding job of thinking deeply and answering these questions tonight as we remember Dr. Martin Luther King on the occasion of his 97th birthday. And we'll be back.
It is easier to build up strong children than to try and repair broken men.
The streets are plagued with crime, violence. There's a lot of poverty, and it's all a result of lack of education that's happening in our schools. So it really is a crisis.
We come from very different political perspectives, but we've come to the same conclusion, and that is there is a crisis in the classroom. Children are being deprived of quality of life because they're being deprived of a good education. We must solve this problem. It's incumbent upon all of us to join hands together to get this done.
We can't afford to wait one more day before we address these issues, because every day we lose another child.
Let's stop the politicking. Let's stop the games. Let's really do something to give these kids a real chance at life and being a part of that American dream.
We need accountability for funding. Many of the districts where you're seeing very low test scores, students graduating with very low literacy and math comprehension rates, they are receiving a lot of funding. So where is the money going where our kids aren't being adequately educated?
If you believe every child is deserving of a quality education, please go to educationjusticefoundation.com. We welcome back Mr. Crump and Ms. James to Your Voice, Your Future dialogue. Ms. James, I was thinking about Mr. Crump's answer to the last question, and I'm curious to know from you, how should modern conservatism honor the civil rights movement while rejecting identity-based politics?
I lost a job over that question, Armstrong. Because I genuinely believe that the conservative movement should be in the leadership of this movement. because I genuinely believe that to be a conservative means that you want to fight for justice and equality, and that you believe in the ideal of America. And I don't see any conflict in that. I don't see any conflict in calling out injustice when you see it. Any American ought to do that. And I think that sometimes the conservative movement has lost its way in not understanding that they have a rightful position to take leadership in that. What true blooded, red blooded American conservative doesn't want freedom, doesn't want to end injustice, doesn't want to see a country where we are not living up to our highest ideal. And if you can't salute those principles, then I may call into question your conservative bona fides. I don't see the conflict. As a matter of fact, I think that our movement has maybe lost its way in terms of understanding the responsibility that we have as true Americans to fight for freedom and justice for all.
You know, Mr. Crump, 50 years from now, how should historians measure whether today's civil rights movement succeeded or failed? And to you, failure may not be the right description.
Well, I think, first off, and again, I think Ms. Cole James talked about this, every generation must face the challenge. Every generation must do its part to make it better for the next generation. Armstrong Williams, I believe that it's always a journey to justice. You know, sometimes we take 2 steps forward, sometimes we have a step back, but we must always keep our eyes forward, our eyes on the prize. Just as I think it's the challenge to form a more perfect union, knowing that we are not perfect. We don't know if it'll happen in our lifetime, our children's lifetime, or our grandchildren's lifetime. But what makes America special is that we always strive to be a more perfect union. I think the failure, if there's to be one, not just for the civil rights movement, but for the United States of America itself, is if we stop striving to be a more perfect union. That right now, the baton is in our hands. We can't blame anybody else for not going forward but us.
Ms. James, what is the solution for Minnesota in all this strife? Is there a better role that the mayor and the governor there can play? Is there a better tone that our president can exercise?
You know, I think there's room for improvement all around. I think that there are certain principles that we should call our friends in Minnesota to. We should call them to peace. I think we've all said there's no room for violence. We should call them to respect the rule of law. The ICE officers and the local police and the state police there have a job to do. We should not interfere or get in the way when they're trying to do their jobs. There is an absolute place for peaceful protests with an emphasis on peaceful. By the way, how can you be annoyed with anyone who is peacefully protesting in this country when this country was founded on protest? This is how we got our start as a nation. And it is a long-standing American tradition to be able to speak your voice, to speak your piece, but to do it in a nonviolent, non-threatening way, not interfering with our law enforcement officers as they go about doing their duties. And that's what I think those are the kinds of things that I hope we hear more of in the days to come, that the rhetoric can be ratcheted down and that we can all understand what we're fighting for here. We're fighting for justice, we're fighting for equality, we're fighting for freedom. And I call every American to fight for those things. And it's not based on race, it's not based on ethnicity, it's not based on political party or ideology. Those are basic things that we all should agree on. And we should do it with an attitude of wanting to reach out, with an attitude of wanting to build. And Armstrong, you probably know I have tried to put some new language around this. And I say what this nation needs right now and what we need in Minnesota and everywhere is a generation of solutionists, people who want to solve problems. I don't care if you're a Republican, a Democrat, liberal, or conservative, but if you come to me, come prepared to fix something. Come prepared to work towards a solution. And if we can have a generation of solutionists who are willing to sit down at a table and in good faith try to fix the things that are broken, I think we can move this country forward. And so in Minnesota and in every capital around the U.S., every state capital international, I'm calling on people to be solutionists, to come to the table, not to yell our bumper stickers at each other, not to throw signs in each other's faces, not to shout each other down. But do you want to fix this? Do you want to make America better? Do you want to solve problems? Then be a solutionist, come to the table, and learn how to work towards consensus. Learn how to solve problems.
Mr. Crump, I definitely want to give you an opportunity to respond to that question.
Certainly, and I agree with Kay in many regards, but I will say Armstrong, as a constitutional civil rights lawyer, I think that the ICE agents have to be held accountable to the Constitution. Our courts have to uphold the Constitution. We can't have, American citizens being detained and jailed. I mean, this is America. We're not the third world communist countries who say you're guilty until proven innocent. No, we have to figure out how we've done it historically, how we can follow the Constitution. I mean, we have precedents for how you can get a warrant, how you can go into people's dwellings and be able to effectuate detainment based on the Constitution. And then we have to have all of our leaders from the cities, the states, and the federal government talk responsibly. We can't have people in the Department of Justice saying that even before we've done an investigation, they've already concluded. Because in America, we believe in due process of the law. We are the people who have shown that to the world. And that's why we are so respected in the world, because we said, no, every person will be heard. And certainly, as Ms. Cole James said, the First Amendment right is the most valuable right of all in our Constitution. That's why it's first. And we can never lose our moral authority on people having the right to be heard. Even your show tonight, Armstrong, your voice, your future. I learn the most things I do when I sit down with you and David Smith, and I try to listen with an open mind, because I want to hear your voices. Where we lose as a society, as a nation, when we start closed in our minds to hearing fellow Americans.
Well, listen, if everybody agrees, then somebody is not necessary and somebody is not learning. We should have enough faith in our philosophy that we can be challenged. And what we all should strive for is the truth. And no matter how much any of us invest in our philosophy, if someone takes us to a higher truth, it is the truth which we should embrace. And I think that's part of the issue today, that people don't want to abandon something they've invested so many decades in. And it's so wonderful seeing this civil dialogue between Mrs. James and Mr. Crump, because this is what our founders would want. This is what Dr. King would want, because this is how we learn and how we grow, by listening to all sides of the coins. And we'll be back.
As a home buyer, you need a lender who cares about your home ownership dreams. United Security Financial has been helping families secure their dream homes for 30 years. We're a national fair practice lender that provides affordable mortgages and low down payment programs to eligible home buyers. To learn how United Security Financial can help you secure your dream home, call 1-800-373-4186.
And welcome back. Mr. Crump, can justice exist without order, or order without justice? And which must come first when both are broken?
Well, I think justice is always the objective. You know, it has to be about justice, because you can have order but have a whole miscarriage of justice. I think what Dr. King said most urgently, and we should all remember that today, and that is when he said in the letter from the Birmingham jail, again, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. But the real profound part, I thought, where he was very direct, Armstrong Williams, is when he said, good people can't call themselves good if they see injustice and they look the other way. And he further articulated that just because they tell us it's legal, that doesn't make it right. He said that we must remember everything that Hitler did to the Jews in Germany, they said was legal. Dr. King said in the letter, that didn't make it right. He said we must remember that they said slavery was legal, but he said that didn't make it right. He said we must remember they said segregation was legal, but that didn't make it right. And Armstrong, he said we must remember everything they did to that little boy named Emmett Till in Money, Mississippi, they said was legal, but he said that didn't make it right. So we can never, ever equate legality with morality. And so it's about justice. You can have perfect order and have a whole institution of injustice.
You know, Ms. James, has media coverage helped clarify moral truth, or harden divisions by rewarding outrage and clicks?
Yeah, we live in a time of social media, which has made it even more difficult for civil dialogue. People want to get likes, clicks. The more outrageous you are, the more attention you get. And I think that is a part of what's contributing to the discourse in our country today. I really want to add to what Ben just said about justice. It is so important for us to understand as Americans that when injustice of any part of our country exists, it's something that's important for all of us to fight to cut that cancer out of the beautiful thing, the beautiful tapestry of America. And I think that I have a special responsibility, and I don't know how many more years the Lord's going to give me on this planet, but to speak truth into my segment. And so I am called to speak directly to conservatives and people in the conservative movement to help them understand that if they're not fighting for justice, if they're not fighting for freedom, if they're not standing in the gap and speaking out, then you really can't call yourself a true blood American conservative. because that's what the core of our values are. We say we believe in equality. We say we believe in liberty. We say we believe in justice. And I see no conflict in calling myself a conservative and calling myself a fighter for justice and freedom and for equality in our country. Because if you're not fighting for those things, you're not a real American, in my point of view.
Mr. Crump, what have we not talked about tonight that needs to be discussed?
Certainly, Armstrong. I think on Martin Luther King holiday, it would be a travesty for us not to talk about one of his most prudent quotes. And he said that the measure of a man is not where he stands at in times of comfort and convenience, but is where he stands at times of conflict and controversy. And some people will have to take account that, are you going to stand for the American principles, or are you going to say, I'm going to take the path of least resistance? God is watching. Everybody will be held accountable.
You know, Ms. James, what single virtue must be rebuilt in our younger generation for our republic to survive?
Wow. Armstrong, that's a great question. I'm not sure if I can identify one single virtue, but I can certainly identify a few. We need people who understand their responsibility as citizens, and so we need great citizens. Benjamin Franklin told us that in order to keep the republic that they had built and started, it was going to require the work of American citizens. And so we need to continue that work. So being a good citizen would be up at the top of the list. Having a heart of love and compassion. Because when you have a heart of love and compassion for your fellow man, you can't stand for injustice. You can't see a member of the human family hurting and not want to step in and help. That's why I'm as pro-life as I am, because the preborn child is a member of the human family. That's why I want to fight for civil rights and justice, because any member of the human family that's coming under attack, we all have to step up. So a virtue of love and compassion. Hard work is a virtue. And I think we need to understand that we're not going to fix this by binge watching Netflix all weekend and sitting on our couches in front of our warm, cozy fireplaces. It's going to require us being engaged and getting out and being involved. And I think that those kinds of virtues are the things that's going to save us. A love for our country, a love for justice, a love for each other, and a strong work ethic that says roll up your sleeves and get to it.
Mr. Crump, if you could have an impact where you could design one national act, legal, cultural, or symbolic, to move our country toward more reconciliation, less hostility, and seeing more of what we have in common than what we would perceive to separate us, what would that be?
It would be, and this is something that I think I learned from talking with you and David, to help individuals live up to their full destiny and achieve everything that God has for them. And it starts with education. That's why we talked about the book Armstrong, Crisis in the Classroom. It still goes to intellect. Ben Franklin said that democracy is like two wolves and a lamb voting on what to have for lunch. You don't have to be as smart as you, Armstrong, to know who's going to win that vote. But he said liberty is making sure that that lamb is well armed to protest that vote. And we are not trying to have our young lambs well armed with guns or assault weapons or any means of violence, but we have to arm them with intellect and strategic thinking and diplomacy. That's how we move America forward. We can't have our citizens be having poor health, having no education, and not having a strong economy. We don't want our citizens to be sick and stupid and broke. No, we want our citizens to be contributing, constructive citizens to this great democracy.
You know, I find it fascinating tonight how much Mr. Crump and Ms. James have in common. I don't think that we'll do a good enough job in about the minute and a half we have left to talk about that we have more that draws us together than separates us, Ms. James, even listening to the both of you tonight.
You know, I have such tremendous respect for my colleague, Ben. He and I may have different perspectives about how we get there, but I guarantee you we want the same thing. I guarantee you we want to see our communities thrive. I guarantee you we both want access to education, access to health care. I guarantee you we want to see violence out of our cities and our streets. I guarantee you we want that. Now, we may have some very different perspectives about how to do it. But if you left us alone in a room and said, come out with some ideas and solutions, I also guarantee you we could. Because when you have people of goodwill and good conscience, we may argue over tactics, but we're not arguing over outcomes.
Mrs. James, I think Mr. Crump, he's smiling, would agree wholeheartedly. This has been a wonderful discussion. And thank you so much for giving your valuable time, your intellect, an example of what stability and respect is all about in our country. Thank you both for joining us on this Martin Luther King Jr. National Holiday. I'm Armstrong Williams.